Alright guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well today. I've been thinking a bit today about democracy and why it's clearly not working in England. You know, as we all know, that the current system of this kind of two-party monopoly is corrupt, it's incompetent, it lacks accountability, it lacks transparency. It is obvious, I think, to most people that it doesn't work and it needs to be replaced. You know, whether that's with some kind of performance review type model, maybe after every 2 years of a government in office, or whether it's the actual system of how voting works, whether it's that we need to bring down the threshold for how many seats a government is supposed to have to make up a majority, whether it's that they have a lesser period of time in office per. Instead of it being 4 years, maybe it's reduced to 3 or 2 years. I don't know, but you know, I don't have the answers to this thing really. But clearly, we need to start. I think having some kind of a national discussion or series of discussions about where we go in the coming decades with this whole severe lack of trust and respect for authorities, because you know, if we don't start to figure out how to improve things, then you know, eventually the public's going to start to lose patience with the system in general. And I think that people are going to start to get desperate. You know, whether that leads to, you know, fringe parties getting into power, whether that leads to civil unrest, I don't know. But you know, we can't go on like this. We can't go on with this two-party state. That's got to stop. That's got to end. Personally, I think we need to have some kind of like a performance review system in place. So at the beginning of let's say we keep the 4-year period, or 5-year period, whatever it is, of a government in office. You know, we've got to have more direct democracy, and I think that because it's a long time and a lot of things can happen in as I say, a lot of things can happen in politics, you know, in a short space of time. A week is a long time in politics, is I think what they say, and it's true. So you know, 4 years is like a lifetime, really. And we all know anyway in recent years that political parties don't tend to keep to their pledges, their manifesto, their promises. So we know it's all kind of optics, and you know, trying to trying to persuade the public into believing in their rhetoric and their you know, optimism and, you know, shallow hope and belief that a government under them will make everything better, when the reality is that things probably aren't really going to improve that much, if much at all, really. If they even make really any changes whatsoever. So the manifesto is basically just smoke and mirrors, and as far as I'm concerned, the voting system itself, I think, is basically essentially a bit of a scam, really. Because although, yes, you might have a choice of, say, 3 or 4 party, 5 parties maybe. You know, given the current first past the post system, the reality is that, you know, really it's usually the Labour or the Conservatives to get into power, typically, and that's a very deliberate system. That's not an accident. I don't think anyway. But that's just my opinion. So I think we need to start being honest about what the system really is and what political parties really are. You know, these are not entities that are really there to represent the public anymore. They're essentially there to do the bidding of big financial interest groups, whether that's lobby groups, you know, whether that's whoever their stakeholders are, whoever their you know, big business interests, big corporation interests, you know, geopolitical factors getting involved, infiltrating things, you know, relationships with other countries because of globalization, etc., etc. So it's a real mess, and basically, you know, you can go out and vote every year at your local elections. You can go out and vote every 5 years or whatever it is. Is it 4 years, 5 years? General election, I don't know, whatever. So but what does it really matter? You know, it's like, okay, fine, you go out and vote. You know, you have some empowerment, right? Because you can put an X on a piece of paper at your local, you know, polling station. And right, okay, what does that really mean? Does that really help you? Does that really improve your life in any way? Does that really give you any real sense of, you know, saying anything? Not really. Sure, you could say, well, it's better than some countries. Some countries don't even have that. You know, okay, fair enough. But where's the actual direct democracy? Like, where's the empowerment of the general public that get to have a say in the things that those parties do or are likely to do if they get into governance? I think you need to have a system in which the public have more say, they have more power, and I think, like I said, this performance review that I would say would happen at the start of the third year of a government's term in office would be it. So by that, essentially a government would have to meet a certain threshold. So how that would work would probably be a series of or maybe it's like one big survey or a series of surveys, I don't know exactly, but the public would be incentivized to do it. Whether it's a legal requirement, something along the lines of jury service, I don't know, maybe, or maybe it's a voluntary thing. But whatever the case may be, the public would be incentivized to do it. Whether that's some kind of discount on the counter tax, some kind of like a coupon maybe for shopping, like I don't know, £40 off, I don't know, whatever. Maybe like a travel card or something that you get for 3 months of travel in your city or what. I don't. Maybe you'd have a series of you'd have a number of options that you would be able to you could choose from at the end of your participation in it. Because that way, then the government would have to buck its ideas up very quickly, and it would have to actually do what they say that they said they were going to do prior to them getting into power during their manifesto pledges and their campaigning. Because if you don't have that, then a government just gets free rein for 5 years, and you don't really have any say in it. Really, you don't really have any input. You don't really have any way of changing things. You just have to just basically wait it out for 5 years until that their term in office comes naturally to an end, or there's a series of leadership challenges that eventually triggers a snap election, or some scandals come about, or that force again a series of leadership challenges over the course of for a few years, like that happened to the Conservatives, whatever, and eventually you end up with a snap general election being called that way, or although it's unlikely, potentially the Prime Minister of any government going to the King or the Queen or whoever it might be and asking them to dissolve Parliament, but that's pretty much not very realistic. But it could happen. So my point is, basically, the public doesn't really have any real power or say or input, apart from putting a little X on a piece of paper at the local elections or mayoral elections, or a general election every 5 years. I think with my idea, basically, the public would be able to have their say on the economy, government performance overall, whether they think that they're carrying out their main pledges in the manifesto. They're saying any scandals that might have gone on, their overall perception and judgment of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet at the time that they would be doing the survey. Review on cost of living, energy prices, food prices, etc., transport, etc., etc., etc. And like I said, the government it would be some kind of, maybe the survey is some kind of one of these like points-based kind of things. Like you have to rate certain things on a scale of 1 to 10, or there's kind of some kind of multiple choice thing. I don't know how it's specifically how it would all work, but you would have something like that basically, or a combination of different things. And the government would have to meet a certain threshold for it to stay in power for the remaining period of its term in office. What should be its remaining time in office. And if it doesn't, then that basically that would then trigger a snap general election. And I also think that it might be a good idea to potentially also have a mechanism in which we say, if the public has decided that government was incompetent or corrupt or just inadequate, whatever were the reasons for it falling, maybe we have a system where we say that government's then that party is then essentially barred or disqualified from being on the ballot paper for one term. So they are, so for this next voting period, they're not allowed to be on the ballot box, maybe at the ballot paper, the voting paper. I don't know whether that would be illegal or not, but illegal or not, I'm not sure. But it might be a potential thing to do. And like I said before, maybe we need to change the threshold for how many seats a government can have to make up a majority government, which would mean that other parties have more of a chance of getting into office, or at least having coalitions anyway. So I think that's my idea. I don't know whether it would work, whether it's possible. I don't know how much it would all cost to implement. It might be too expensive, but it's just an idea potentially for some more of a kind of direct democracy-like system, which I think would potentially make a lot of I believe would be a much more advantageous position for the public, and probably over time it would. Well, I would hope that it would mean that future governments would take their role as public officials more seriously. They would take their role in office they would treat the public with more respect, and and hopefully would create more respect and more trust back into the system from the general public, the voter base. Because, the last thing that a government would want is to have to call a snap general election after 2 years when it was only elected 2 years ago. So eventually, I would think that it would lead to governments thinking to themselves, we've got to start being more serious and more mature and doing things properly and taking the needs of the general public with more gravity, with doing things in a way that the general public actually put us into power to do. That's why they voted for us. That's why they put up their trust, because that's what the system is. It's a system of trust. And if the public feel that they're being betrayed, then I think they should have a right to get rid of that government through a fair mechanism. And I think this kind of like government performance review type of system would be the way to do it. That way you don't have to wait 5 years to have another general election. So there should be a mechanism of which the public can say, this is not what I voted for. And especially with the whole leadership challenge thing as well, because, this whole mess that's going on with Keir Starmer at the moment, and various scandals, and his seemingly lack of moral judgment and questionable ethics, then I don't know. It seems to me to be a very compromised individual. So I do think that I don't think it's right that the public should have to tolerate a party under new leadership, because that's not who they voted for. They voted for the leader that took that party into governance, the leader that is the main head of should be accountability for that party, and was, or at least should be seen as such prior to the election and post-election. And so as far as I'm concerned, if a government decides to keep changing leaders, that party's kind of lost its legitimacy, because you voted for the person that represented that party. You didn't necessarily vote for the party overall. You voted for the head of that party to represent that party. And if they keep changing that, then as far as I'm concerned, they don't have any real legitimacy as being the leader. Because although the party can decide to get rid of whichever leader they want, which is clearly what's going to happen to Keir Starmer after the upcoming local May elections, I think everybody knows that. So we'll see probably Rachel Reeves or Angela Rayner or God knows whoever, whatever sad excuse of a Labour politician take that role up, replace Starmer, which I don't really want to think about it, but that's got to stop. That was what I'm trying to say. This has got to stop. This whole this constant chain of just in and out all the time. This has got to stop. It's like, if you can't keep it together as a political entity, then you shouldn't be in government. You shouldn't be in power, as far as I'm concerned, really. If you can't steady the ship in your own party, then you shouldn't be in politics, because you're just too immature, you're too unstable, and you care more about optics than you do about serving the general public, which is what you're supposed to be in government for. So we need, I guess what I'm saying in this whole video is we need dramatic change in England, and probably much across the Western world, but certainly in England, we need radical reforms of what we call democracy. We need serious new ideas as far as direct democracy is concerned. Whether we need proportional representation, I don't know. That's some people are arguing about that. I don't know whether that would be a better system or not, really. But I think that the public needs to have some kind of a real mechanism in which they have more empowerment than they currently do. That's for sure. How that actually works in practice, I don't know. I don't have the resources or the money or the power or the leverage or status, obviously, to be able to do that. But at some point, whether that's under a reform government, which is probably what the next government will be, unfortunately, whether that's with a coalition with Restore or whether that's with a coalition with Advance UK, I don't know what's going to happen there. But if they're going to merge or not, I don't know. But it's quite possible. But we'll see. But it seems to me probably that either Reform is going to win a majority, or there's going to be some kind of coalition, maybe with the Conservatives. I don't know. But anyway, that's we'll see how that kind of stuff plays out. But we need change. This has been needed for a very long time. As far as the current situation with politics is concerned, which is not what I made this video for, but while I'm here, I might as well just address it. I like, to a certain extent, Ben Habib. I quite like Rupert Lowe. I'm certainly very suspicious of Reform, as I've made other videos about it on my channel. I certainly have no faith in Labour as it currently stands, unfortunately. As someone that's come from a working class background, I have no faith in Labour. And I think most people from the north or working class areas of the United Kingdom are pretty much at the wit's end with this current shambles that is the Labour Party, which is these people don't represent the people that have suffered from deindustrialisation and the impact of globalisation on towns and cities in the UK. These people don't care. And neither do the Conservatives, by the way. Oh, and neither do Reform. My only real faith in politics now, and I'm still sceptical and definitely very cautiously optimistic about Restore and Advance. But if I had to decide, if I had to say which parties I had any flicker of faith in, it would have to be Restore and Advance UK. And I think, to be honest with you, I think a lot of the public are probably feeling that way right now. A lot of people are feeling very disillusioned with the Lib Lab con scam, and have been for probably 30 years, I reckon. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. Certainly, Labour are pretty much kind of doomed come 2029 or 2030, whenever the next election is. If it's not sooner than that, could very well be. If things start to go very sour after May's local elections, which I believe Stan will decide to resign after them, because it's a way for him to kind of hold some kind of dignity and integrity as a way of getting out. And I don't think he necessarily minds taking the blame for the poor results of the upcoming elections, because we all know it's going to be an absolute wipeout for Labour. I think we all. I mean, I don't know for certain, but it seems likely that Labour are going to get their asses kicked pretty severely. So Labour's definitely on its way out. We're definitely seeing the beginning of the end of Labour. I mean, how embarrassing. But that's what happens when you have a party that is supposedly representative of the working classes or the underclasses, and they're punishing them just as much as the Conservatives do, and just as much as Reform will do when they're getting power, which they will. my only concern with Rupert Lowe and Ben Habib, to be honest with you, is with their ideas on their, not so much their ideas, but their general attitude towards welfare. Now, I don't want to make this whole video into a thing about that, but just want to briefly touch upon it, because while I agree with them in terms of severely dealing with illegal immigration and making this, the legal immigration system much stricter, which is fair enough. I think that's the moral thing to do. There's nothing wrong in that. I don't think that punishing those on welfare through voluntary work, through essentially community service like jobs, or essentially replacing council work is really the way to go. I mean, it's kind of a bit idiotic, actually. It doesn't really make any sense to me that not only are you going to replace jobs, but you're essentially asking people to work potentially full-time for their benefits, in which case, well, first of all, that's probably illegal. And secondly, if you're expecting people to work full-time, then why don't you just create jobs for them? But we all know they don't really want to solve the real problems of deindustrialisation and change the welfare state to something more practical. We know why? Because it would cost too much money. So again, like the Conservatives, Restore and Advance UK will probably have a similar kind of approach to dealing with welfare, which would be the sticky plaster solution of workfare schemes, voluntary schemes, forced confidence building programs and all that kind of stuff. But we'll see. I mean, look, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We'll have to see how things pan out. But that's really my only real drawback with those parties. I don't like this kind of scapegoating, demonisation of the unemployed as someone that's been through that system and knows what it really is. I think it's deeply unfair. There are a lot of problems in a lot of these areas that I don't think these wealthy individuals, which is what they are, truly understand. They think they do, but they don't. I understand it because I lived it, so I know what I'm talking about. And it's not fun. While I accept that there is a real need for reform, and there is a real need to get people back to work. The reality is I think we really need to deindustrialise towns and cities. We've got to bring manufacturing back. We've got to deal with the consequences of globalisation. We've got to start relying more on our own backyard resources and building more power plants and things like that, probably at some point nuclear power. We've got to start being more self-sufficient, self-reliant, because if we don't do that, we'll always be at the whim of geopolitical issues, impacts, of course, over the next few decades of global warming, how that will play into the whole system. And everything's so interconnected that it's such a vulnerable system. And I think we've got to, at some point, disconnect ourselves from that. And again, come back to the whole thing of direct democracy. We've got to have more means in which to do that. We've got to have more means in which for the public to have more say over markets and energy prices and food prices and all this, everything really. There should be more. I think we need more focus on referendums, on more local. We need a kind of public parliament of sorts, if you will. We need some kind of system that gives the average person much more means in which they can influence things. That's the only way you can have a better society. You can have more direct democracy. You can have a fairer political system. Now, I'm not saying that we're ever going to live in some kind of ultimate idealist utopian-like system. I'm not suggesting that at all. We're never going to have that. There are always going to be flaws. There are always going to be imperfections. But that doesn't mean we don't try. That doesn't mean we don't try to work for something, towards something better. And that's all I'm saying is I think we can do better. And because if we don't, we will regress and things will get worse for everybody. And eventually it will cause more and more problems over time. And I don't want to see where that ends up, because I don't think it'll be pretty. So we need change, and we need it quickly, and it must be radical change. It must be serious, major reforms of just about everything, really. I think it's so many things are outdated, just completely fragmented, not politically, societally, culturally, in many respects. We need to start having some very, very serious discussions, I think, in England about what our country should be from here on out. And I don't want to get into a whole spiel about national identity, but I think that's probably a part of it as well. You know, and this is partly why I kind of agree with Rupert Lowe on a lot of things he says, because I think we do need to start to reevaluate what our country means, what it represents, what it stands for, what it doesn't stand for, and say this is who we are, this is what we are. We are a strict country, but we're fair. We're not an isolationist nation by any means, but we're also not going to be an open door. We're not going to tolerate open door border policies, are we? We're not going to do that. We're an island, a small island at that. We've only got so much infrastructure. We've got a struggling economy. People are struggling financially. We've got mass unemployment. And clearly the future of you know, we can't afford to carry on like this. We just can't. We can't. We have got to say this is enough. This is enough now. We must change direction from here. So that's, you know, it's just that's just what I think about the whole, you know, there's these different things, but they're all sort of connected, and I suppose in a way. So I'll leave it at that. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comment section. If you agree with me or disagree with me, or you know, if you have any ideas, if you know, how would you deal with these kind of things? You know, what would you do? There must be some better ways of doing things. There must be a brighter future ahead of us. At least I hope so. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you very much. Bye bye.